So let's come back into our floating leaves and let's make our input parameters. So I'm double clicking on my graph and I'm going to come into input parameters and I'm going to create one. We're going to have two. We're going to have our leaf swing, and I'm going to make it a float 4. You can have a series of float 1s. It's just more elegant to have it on a float 4. And we'll call this leaf swing, and we'll make it part of the leaves group. And I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to call this leaf rotation. Okay, so I'm going to set this at 0 for all of these. And I'm going to set my minimum as -5 and my maximum as +5. And I actually should have done that to this one too, because I want it the same. Okay, so I have these two inputs in here. I've got no place to put them yet. Oh, let's make labels. We forgot to make labels. So we will call this leaf 1. And you can call those labels whatever you want. But it's going to, each one of them is going to deal with one of these. So each one of these is going to get its own independent input parameter. But first we need to fix it so that we can do that, because if we look at this right now, we've got this leaves effects, but we've got no way of affecting it from this particular graph. It's all controlled in the actual function itself. So we have to get these two to talk to each other, and that's basically what we're doing now. So we've set up input parameters in our main graph. Then we're going to go back into our external effects. And if I double click on this graph, I can see that I also have input parameters here. And the first one I'm going to call my swing. And I need a float 1. I mean, this is it's going to be requiring a float 1. So I'm going to leave this as float 1. And I'm going to make a label for it. Now, you'll notice that these are more limited in the stuff that they can do, because they're basically just for inputs. So we've got our swing, and then we're also going to want something to go with the rotation. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste my inputs, and I'm going to call this rotation. And if I come back into my floating leaves, at least I hope it'll show up now. It might not, because I don't have it actually hooked up to anything. Oh, it does. Okay. So I've created these inputs, and now we can actually take the variables that we created in this graph, so they're both float 4s, and we can hook them up. But again, we're going to have to swizzle out what we need. And that's why I made it a float 4, because I can have them all on the same slider. It just makes for an more elegant UI. It's probably more efficient too. I wouldn't be surprised. And this, we're going to have our leaf swing. And we're just going to make a copy of this, and we're going to make this other one leaf rotation. And then we just plug them in to the correct bits. And this one I have as X, and then once we start copying these out, we're going to have this one as Y, Z, and W. In fact, we can do that now. Let's do that now, because from now on, we're just going to be working in the other effects map. I'm going to make 3 more of these. And then we'll just go through them now and change what we need to change. So this is going to be Y. And then we also need to change the random seed. Oh, we need to go through those too. Hold on a second. Let me get the random seed. Okay, so we had the second ones as image 1. So this one also needs to change to image 1. And I believe those are squared away. I'm not going to hook them up yet. They're just built now. Because I don't want to confuse myself. I want to make sure my animations are squared away before we take care of that. So we now have our inputs here, and we've got them built here, we've got them hooked up in here, and now we just need to get them to do stuff for us. So let's start with the rotation. It's simpler. So my top speed is 0.1. And I've got my sliders divided by 5. So I'm going to want to multiply whatever my float speed is, my rotation speed is rather, by 0.02. Because if I multiply 0.02 by 5, I'm going to end up with 0.1. So this is going to be that multiplier. And it's going to translate that large slider into a much smaller number. So let's get our variable. And here it's a float 1. Rotation. And we're going to multiply it together. And that's going to replace this top speed here. And we're going to do the same thing here. So let's get another constant. And if we follow the same principle, it's going to add a 0 in there and make it 0.002. And we're going to multiply that. And we need to get our leaf swing. And we replace that top speed there. So drag these two out here because it's also going to affect the swing. These two are kind of related, so they're working off this same swing because I want this to speed up as it swings more. So here we have 0.05 is our top speed. So the constant that we're going to want that goes on those 0 to 5, well, negative 5 to 5 sliders is 0.01, because if we multiply this against whatever our swing number is, we're going to end up with that top speed. So let's see what that gives us. Now, we've got all 4 of them. It's only the top one's going to work because that's the only one we've got plugged in. Okay, for starters, I don't think I want to have it set at 0. I'm going to have to put in some other numbers in there. But otherwise, it works. If it's moving faster, it's swinging more. And it'll do it opposite direction. And it'll rotate in the opposite direction. So our animation works, and I'm pretty happy with that. So let's go back and plug everything in and see what it looks like all plugged in. So I'm going to come back into my floating leaves. I'm going to come back into my effects map. And we'll publish it out. Oh yeah, I keep forgetting to change that default. We have to do that. Yeah, so they're all just kind of, just wiggling around. Right, so let's actually hook this up now to our water and actually make it look like an actual material. as opposed to just a grayscale mask. But that's the real hard work of it. The rest of it is pretty easy. All right, we're going to need to make a mask here. I'm also going to move the global opacity on this effects map up just a skosh. I'm going to make it 2 so you can see them a bit better. And this is going to give us a better, this will work for our color, okay? Just 1 doesn't have enough detail in it. I like it better at 2. But it's not good enough to mask the actual leaves out, so we're going to have to create a separate mask for that. So something like that. And then we can use this to separate the leaves from the water. And, well, as far as the normals are concerned, I want to add one more thing in. If we stick these leaves on top of the normals as they are now, well, let's get a height to normal to actually make our leaves normals, which we don't have yet. I'm going to do that. And let's bring it down a bit. That's a little harsh. And if we combine this with our water normal as it is right now, I'm going to use an overlay because I want it to I want to see the water underneath. I want it to move a little bit along with the water. Because they're not like super stiff. That looks pretty good. But if I play this, you can, like, the leaves don't look like they're affecting the water at all. I want them to kind of have their own set of little, like, ripples where they're disturbing the water around them. So I want to add that in. And the other thing I'm going to do right now is set those defaults while I remember. Let's take care of that first. I want these numbers not 0. Yeah, I'm just putting in whatever. I don't really care. I just don't want it to be 0. All right, so that's taken care of. So let's make some disturbances in the normal of the water around here. I'm going to get a blur grayscale. Blur HQ. That's the one I want. I want the high quality one. And I'm going to get this here. I'm also going to make it smaller. I'm going to make it parent -3 because I don't need, it gives me a better blur, but I don't really need it at full strength. I tried it with both. It works better with this one, but I do want it, the format, to be high quality. And then I set the intensity at 2.03 is what I had, which is very precise, but lower than what you got here. Let's find a spot for this. Let's do it right here. We'll move this up. The next thing I want to do is I kind of want to warp it by what's going on with the water. But I don't really want it at the same size. So I'm going to get a transform 2D. And I'm going to tile this down to make it much smaller. I had it tile 4, so that means divided by half twice. So, small grains. And we're going to get a warp. And we're going to take this blurred leaf mask and we're going to warp it against the water very gently. So I had this set down to 0.13. So it kind of creates these little disturbances in here. Now the other thing we need to do is bring this back up to parent size also, the warp. So we've got, I mean, the leaves are going to be on top of here, so what essentially we're doing is we're creating these little wavelets on the outside of it. And then I just used a regular normal here, but I set the intensity up really high. Again, I kind of experimented with it. It just seemed to work better than the height to normal in this situation, but I set the intensity up super duper high. And then I got a blur and blurred that out. So it looks something like that. And then we get a blend node, and we put that over the water with an overlay blend. And let's see if that looks good. So this is our leaves, and now we're replacing the water with this. Looks kind of rough. I don't know. Well, we're going to have to adjust that. Yeah, there's something up with this. I think let's try bringing this blur down a bit. That's better shape-wise, but that's super duper intense. So we can bring this down. And then maybe bring the opacity down on this a little bit. I want it pretty subtle. I don't want there to be too much waviness, but I want it, I mean, it will make a difference. So maybe like that. Still a little raw. I mean, it's not moving. We'll get it to move in a minute, but still got a bit of an edge on it. So maybe bring this intensity up a bit. Oh, you know what I'm going to do instead of that? Let's maybe make that bigger again. Yeah. That might have been our problem. Yeah, I'm getting those little edges around here. Okay, let's animate it, and we can play with it a little bit more afterwards. You know what? I just looked at my notes. I actually got this wrong. I used the animated Perlin noise instead of the Gaussian. I don't know why I did that. I mean, it doesn't really, we just switch it out. And then this does make sense because that does become the correct size. That's what was wrong with it. And all of a sudden everything seems to be more or less correct because we're getting that edge around it, and it's already animated. So it's already animated according to what the water is. So let's look at that again since we had the wrong thing plugged in. Yeah, that's better. We can even have a little bit more of it. But you can see how there's like beginning to be little shifts in the water around where those leaves are. Yeah, that's probably good. Anyway, you can adjust them how you want. So I think I'm going to up this intensity a bit on the normal and on the blur, because that kind of spreads them out a little bit. Yeah. All right. It makes it look like they're not just like completely separated from the water. It just kind of ties them in a little bit. And that's the normals for the leaves. Okay. The next thing we want to do is let's get this color hooked up. So we've got our color for the water already. We're going to need another gradient map that we're going to plug in here. And this is going to give us our leaf color. We can find something that we like in here. So I'm not worrying about this stuff out here. I'm just worrying about what's going on inside the leaves. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm not going to obsess about these colors. We're just going to go, ooh, yikes. Don't like that. This is a problem with our mask. This is like a white section right in here. And there's some color in there. Let's go back. We can probably make that work. It's just all up in here. That's better. Okay. So we got leaf color and we got watercolor. And we've got our mask. And we can plug that in here. All right. And we can deal with our opacity pretty quick as well. I'm just going to duplicate this. Get rid of those two noodles. We've already got white to go on top. And I'm going to get another color, which I'm going to turn to a grayscale, and I'm going to find the opacity of my water, which is probably someplace in here. I'm going to turn on my environment so I can get a better idea of what my opacity looks like. Yeah, that's probably fine. You can set how you want, but I'm going to call that opacity finished, and that's as simple as that's going to get. So we've got those two done. We've got our normals done. We need to take care of our roughness, our height, and our specular level. Now, I'm not entirely sure if I've got my height set in here. I want to double check that. Nope. So I'm going to set my height to 1. And this is where our second effects map comes in. I'm just going to make a duplicate of this. And what I want to have happen here is I kind of want the edges to turn up a little bit. And there's a node in here called shape glow. Oh, except I want the grayscale version, sorry. And this does a glow like in Photoshop, you know, you can do layer effects, and this is kind of the same thing. It's got a mask and an output. Oh, except I plugged it into the wrong thing. It's not where I want it. I want it off of this. We can actually have 2 of them. And we're going to create new shapes. Except I want it to be, I'm going to plug in the mask, by the way. I want my glow to be on the inside, though. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to set my width to -0.5. And what that's doing is it's kind of a little bit less than that. It's bringing the glow on the inside. And I'm thinking about the height of the leaves now. So I'm thinking that I want my edges to kind of curl up a little bit, is what I'm looking for here. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to plug, I'm going to make sure they match. Yeah, that's right. And I'm going to plug them into my effects map. And it's going to give me the exact same effects map because we're doing the exact same thing to it. It's actually a duplicate. It's just going to give me this height version of my leaves. And I'm going to get another levels node, and we're going to use this to adjust the overall height here. Because, I mean, obviously we don't want them quite that high. So we're going to get a blend node. We're going to put this on top. We're going to use our very same mask, and we're going to put it over our water height. And let's take a look at them together. So, oh, wait a minute. We've got a, what's going on here? Ah, that's what's going on here. That's better. Okay, so we've got our various leaves here. It's all matching up to what's going on here. But they are way, 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 way too high as far as heights go. And let's take a look at what it actually looks like in here, which will probably make life easier. Yeah, there's height in here, okay. So I can use this levels node now, well actually both of them. We have one for the leaves and one for the water. And we can adjust our heights that way. I think we're going to look at these leaves. I mean, they're leaves, they're not, you know, boats. So I don't want that too high. I'm not sure. Let's, whether we want to make it, no, definitely not. Okay, we're going to, yeah, I'm going to leave it as a copy. I think that's fine. It just raises them up a bit, and it raises them up by the edges a bit more than the insides. Yeah, okay. So all we have left now is the roughness and the specular level. So for our roughness, we're going to go ahead and work off of this mask as well. And I'm going to get an invert grayscale. And we'll start there because like the highest bits I'm going to call the most polished. It doesn't really matter in this case. I'm just being arbitrary. It's what I usually do, so whatever. I think in this case you could probably do without. It doesn't matter. But what does matter is this levels node, because that's what we're going to use to adjust it. And then we're going to use a solid color. Oh, we've already got it. Well, we can use one of these for our water. And we'll use that mask. And we can have shinier water now. So we've got some very, very shiny bits on here, which I don't like at all, which is these guys right up there. So I'm going to tone the whole thing down. And because we're using a mask, we can then globally kind of shine it back up again. I mean, they are moist. Well, you know, something like that, I guess. It's your call. You know, at this point, I'm not stressing these little details because this lesson is mostly about the effects map. I'm going to hit D to dock that so it's out of the way. And that's our roughness. And for the specular level, we're going to kind of do the same thing. We're going to get, well, again, we can use this color for our background. And then we'll get our mask. And we can get another levels node. And I think plug it in directly into here. And we'll use that for our specular level. Again, we just want a little bit of variety here. So the water is going to be pretty darn specular. So we can bring that up. And then the leaves are going to be relatively low on the specular spectrum because they're not super glassy. I think they could probably be a bit darker even than they are now. Probably something like that. Because they're not going to be terribly reflective. I mean, they're shiny, but they're not really reflective. Okay, I do believe that that is everything but the water movement done. Let's take a look at it. I tried fixing this. I have no idea where it's coming from. It's that glow grayscale thing. I think there's something up with this, with the node itself, and I can't fix it. It's just a warning. It's not gonna make anything stop, but it's annoying. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. The one thing I really want to take care of now is the water movement. So, I mean, what we have going on here makes more sense if this water is actually flowing because they're being pretty active. So the default is now working, for standing water. It's a pretty good default for just like water that's just like standing there with some leaves floating in it. And then once we get them, and then, but that's why I put all these in here. So as the water starts flowing, which we're going to take care of in a second, you can actually adjust the leaves to fit what's going on with your water. I mean, if you want to get really fancy with it at home, you can connect those two up so you only have the one slider that takes care of everything, but that's only if you want to do it, and I'm not going to do it here. Right, so the last thing is actually pretty straightforward. We are going to create first an input parameter that's going to take care of our water movement. So we're going to add one, and we're going to call it water speed, and we're going to make it a float 2. And I'm going to make the default, we'll have it 0 for both of them. And then the minimum I'm going to have as -1, and then we'll have the maximum as +1. So we can move the water direction on the x and the y in either direction. And so we'll call this speed x, and that's not how you spell speed, and speed y. Right. So we've got a single transform 2D node here, and we're just going to set up our water movement. So I'm going to come into the offset, empty function. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is slow down my timer. And because I already experimented with this, I came up with the number 0.1. So this is going to be our basic time. But we also have to connect it to the variable we just made, and we just made this float 2 variable for our water speed. So we have an x speed and a y speed. Now, because of the way we set up our float 2, so we can go in either direction, so positive or negative, I need to kind of be able to do them, I need to be able to independently multiply them by the time. So I'm going to have to swizzle out 2 float 1s here. So I will swizzle out my x, and I will swizzle out my y. And we're going to independently multiply each one of them by what we've designated as our basic time. And then, because this requires a float 2, we are going to have to vector this back into a float 2. And that is going to be our output node. And then we come back in here and we hook it into what we're doing. I just want to make sure that it's doing what I'm doing. I just want to make sure that it's doing what I want it to be doing, so I'm going to just hook it into one right now and just export it and see if it's functioning as advertised before we go to all the trouble of making copies. Okay, so we got water speed in here now. Yeah. So the speeds at which it's doing the X and Y movements are different, so it gives you a lot of control. Good. Excellent. Back out of that so it's not attached to anything, and we need to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more copies. Normal is back here. All right. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. I'm not sure the height's set in. Let's. No, it's not. Stop that and start it again. Sometimes it helps to just reset it. Yeah. So the only thing left to do now is to get our actual water ripples to match up with the water speed. Because the way things stand right now, as we speed up the X and Y on the water, the ripples just stay at the same speed, and that really doesn't make any sense. And this is a relatively easy fix. In fact, we talked about it at the very beginning. All we got to go and do now is replace the timings on our on these two water things here. Because if we come into the disorder, we have the same thing on both disorders. So I'm going to get into this first one. So right now we have the time as a constant thing, and we need to get that to work relative to the water speed. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to get my flow 2 water speed variable. But this is going to be requiring a float 1 output. I'm going to swizzle out my water speed float 1. I mean, it depends on how quick and dirty we want to do this. We've got our directions here going either positive or negative. Well, I mean, our directions here, because water speed can go, the limit I think we have is 1 and -1. So if I swizzle out a -1 here, and I multiply it by time, it's going to send it in the backwards direction, and that's fine. The problem that I'm having is that these two can be two different things. So we're going to have to find an average for them. And it doesn't really matter whether our ripples are moving positive or negative. It's just a question of getting the speed. So I'm going to find the average, but I'm going to do it using the absolute value, because if I don't use the absolute value, that those positives and negatives are going to interfere with what I want to have happen. So if I swizzle out the absolute x and y of my water speed, and then I add them together, and I take that result and I divide it by 2, or I prefer, in this case, just to multiply it by 0.5, we end up with the average of water speed. And I'm going to use this as the basis. I mean, we may want to speed it up off the average a little bit, but I think this will probably do the trick, because it's not science, right? It's just a question of getting it to go faster or slower according to whether, our water is moving or not. But there's one more problem that we're going to have to deal with before we plug this in. If we follow the math here, we got water speed, absolute, get the average, and that's all great. And it works as long as water speed is not 0, because we're going to be multiplying this by time. And if water speed is 0, the absolute of 0 is 0, the average of 0 is 0. Time multiplied by 0 means it's not moving. So we need to actually fix that if we want it to work while the water is standing still. So let's get an if-else and make a very simple conditional statement. If, actually, I'm going to need a float 2. Wait a minute, I'm kind of off my notes a little bit here. Do I want a float 1 or a float 2? I would rather have a float 1. You know what? I'm going to do it off of here, because all I care about is if this number here is 0. I'm not going to worry about x's and y's. It's adding a layer of unnecessary complication. So if this result is 0, whatever is coming out of here, I want time times 0.01, because that's our base. Otherwise, we're going to have what's happening here. Oh, no, wait. We need to get another operator here and multiply that by time, because this is static. So we need to do this instead. There. And then we'll set this as our output node. Let's just make sure we got this logic right before we send it out. So our water speed, we're going to take the absolute, and we're going to get the average of the absolute, and that is going to tell us by what number we're going to multiply this time. If this number is 0, we are going to use the old timer. So let's go ahead and copy this whole thing and stick it on the other one as well, because we have exactly the same thing on both of them. We'll set that as the output node, and let's see what that looks like. So we've got the water set at 0 right now, and it's kind of moving just a little bit, and our leaves are moving just a little bit. And then as our water speeds up, the ripples get faster as well. You can adjust the speed of those ripples. I mean, I think they probably could be faster, but I don't know if I'm going to worry about that. You can add another number in here that's just going to take whatever this average is and make it go quicker. I'm not going to worry about that right now, because we've got the basics all set up in here, and you can fine-tune it how you want. But I think that's pretty much it at this point. We've got our leaves that will move around for us how we want them to. I'm going to kind of wiggling around on their own. And I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to call it a day, and I will see you in the next video.